Long before television cameras found him, Eric MINS was simply the quiet kid in Newport, Tennessee, who everyone called Digger. Born on February 20th, 1964, he grew up in a town wrapped in pine-smell sawdust and the damp hush of mountain rain rolling off the Smokies. It wasn't a wealthy place, but it was a close one. The kind of town where a neighbor helped you before you even had to ask, and where the real lessons of life weren't taught in a classroom but handed down on porches after dark. His father, Charlie MINS, ran the local funeral home, and that building became Digger's second home after school. While other teenagers were out looking for any excuse to avoid responsibility, Digger swept floors, polished caskets, and watched his father move through grief with a kind of calm precision that left an impression on him. Eventually, he was trusted to help prepare a body for burial, work that demanded a steady hand and an even steadier heart. It wasn't the death that stayed with him so much as the discipline. Every detail had to be exact, every motion deliberate. That habit of care settled into him early and never really left. But the funeral home wasn't the only classroom shaping him. Out in the hollows around Newport, men gathered after dark around the soft glow of copper stills, turning corn into something clear and potent, working with patience most people never got to see. Digger was captivated. To outsiders, these were men skirting the law. To Digger, they were craftsmen, people who shared what little they had, who valued the doing of the thing over the money it might bring, and who chose a harder, more honest way of working even when shortcuts were sitting right there. So he grew up straddling two very different worlds, the solemn order of the funeral parlor and the wild, secretive freedom of the stills and the woods. One taught him structure. The other lit something in him that kept him up at night. Not rebellion exactly, just a pull toward the idea of making something instead of only tending to endings. Everything changed when Digger crossed paths with Marvin Popcorn Sutton, a sharp-tongued, larger-than-life moonshiner out of Maggie Valley, North Carolina, long before Sutton became a folk hero with a national reputation. Popcorn had spent decades perfecting recipes passed down through generations and staying one step ahead of the law. He didn't open his world up to just anyone. Digger earned his way in through patience rather than charm. He didn't talk much or try to impress anyone. He simply worked, watched, and listened, and that was enough to earn something rare, a mentor willing to actually teach him. Under Popcorn's guidance, Digger learned to read a still almost like a living thing, sensing its temperature by feel, judging a run's readiness without needing to check a single gauge. More than technique, Popcorn passed down a philosophy. He was fond of telling Digger that the work wasn't about greed. It was about pride. That single idea reshaped how Digger thought about the craft entirely. It wasn't a hustle. It was tradition, patience, and a relationship between a man and his work that couldn't be rushed. Hauling corn, chopping wood, standing over open flame for hours. None of it felt like labor to Digger. It felt almost sacred. He started to think of the still itself as something alive, with the copper coils as veins and every bubble in the mash as a small sign of life. When Popcorn Sutton eventually died after years of federal authorities finally catching up with him, something in the mountains went quiet. Digger felt like he'd lost his last real link to an older way of doing things. But instead of letting that loss end anything, he made a quiet promise to himself. What Popcorn taught him wouldn't disappear. He kept working the stills, not for recognition, but to keep that pride alive in every batch, almost like his old teacher was still standing beside him. For nearly 40 years, Digger practiced his craft far from any spotlight, and the kind of secrecy the trade had always required. Moonshining wasn't supposed to be public. That began to shift because of a longtime friend, Mark Ramsey, who had joined the cast of Moonshiners, a Discovery Channel series following real moonshiners across Appalachia. When Mark first asked Digger to join him on camera, Digger turned him down flat. He'd spent decades mastering the art of staying invisible, and fame held no appeal for a man who was perfectly content behind a still. But Mark kept at it, warning Digger that if he didn't tell his own story, someone else eventually would, and they might not get it right. That argument landed. Stepping in front of cameras for the first time filled Digger with real doubt. What happened instead surprised everyone, himself included. Audiences responded to him instantly. He wasn't performing. He was simply himself, dry humor, a thick mountain drawl, and an obvious mastery of his craft that couldn't be faked. His calm confidence and quiet respect for tradition made him one of the show's most trusted figures. The chemistry between Digger and Mark turned Moonshiners into more than entertainment. It became a story about friendship built on years of shared work. Their success eventually led to a partnership with Sugarland's distilling company in Gatlinburg, where they helped launch legal spirits, including flavors like hazelnut rum and rye apple shine, built on recipes born in secret. For the first time, Digger could put his name on a bottle without looking over his shoulder. Fame brought its own kind of culture shock. Strangers recognized him in grocery stores, at festivals, even in airports, asking for photos and stories. It was a strange adjustment for a man who'd spent most of his life trying not to be noticed. He handled it with the same modesty that had defined him all along, insisting he was still just a craftsman doing what he loved. But a much harder challenge was waiting for him, one that had nothing to do with cameras or fame. By the show's 13th season, longtime fans had come to see Digger as a fixture, steady, unshakable, the calm voice cutting through the chaos. So when he started to look tired and move more slowly than usual, speculation spread quickly online. For months, no one had answers. Eventually, Digger told Mark Ramsey directly. He had been diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, a slow-developing cancer affecting the blood and bone marrow. He delivered the news with the same steady, matter-of-fact tone he'd carried his whole life, telling Mark plainly that it wasn't a death sentence. But it certainly wasn't fun either. There were no tears on camera, just quiet honesty, which somehow hit harder than any dramatic reaction could have. Fans responded with an outpouring of support from across the country, many treating him like family despite never having met him. The reaction made sense. Moonshining itself had always been rooted in communities getting each other through hard times.